Hi everybody, I'm Teresa Jackson. Thanks for being here. I think most of you that are here probably know who I am. I really appreciate your support. This is my first time doing a live YouTube. I'm excited, maybe a little bit nervous. There's a lot of tech that's involved in this and I've done a few practices, but hopefully everything will go smooth and you'll bear with me if I have any tech issues while we go. I want to talk about Lightroom today. There's a lot of different Lightrooms. There's Lightroom Classic, there's Lightroom Mobile. I talk to a lot of photographers about Lightroom because I love Lightroom. I love talking about it, I love teaching it, but everywhere I go, every photographer I talk to is somewhat confused, maybe a lot confused, because there's so many different offerings. So my goal today is to try and demystify what's going on with Lightroom. Why do we have multiple Lightroom applications? How do they work together? Can they work together? Should you use them both or not use them both? That's my goal today. So let's start off by talking about what the two desktop applications are, Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. And I have some slides for that, so I'm going to switch over to that right now. So we'll start off with Lightroom. Lightroom is the newer application. Lightroom came out a few years ago as part of the Creative Cloud. And when Lightroom came out, the original Lightroom got renamed to Lightroom Classic. So why would you want to use Lightroom, the new application, versus the older application, Lightroom Classic? Well, first of all, Lightroom is a beautiful application. It's really well designed. It has a great user interface. It's been rebuilt from the ground up. It's really easy to learn how to use and to use. And with Lightroom, when you add photos to it, when you import your photos, they're uploaded to a cloud. So they don't live on your computer anymore, they're in the cloud. And because of that, they're securely backed up. So you're not going to have to worry about backing up your photos, making multiple copies of them. It's also easy to find your images and you're not going to lose them if they're in the cloud. The Lightroom application has this artificial intelligent image search, which is amazing. You don't have to have keywords to find things that are really common. It uses the internet and accesses this intelligent search to look for images in your catalog. So those are some good reasons why you might want to use Lightroom. And let's take a look at Lightroom Classic, which is my favorite. I'm having problems getting my mouse. See, I knew I would have tech problems. Let me switch over here to this and switch to the next slide. And it's not working. Darn you. Sorry about that. Here we go. Now we got it. Okay, so why use Lightroom Classic versus Lightroom? Well, Lightroom Classic is the application that I use primarily for my personal photography, and it's what most professionals will use as well. So it's been around the longest. So it has all the professional features that you might need, and some of those features are missing from Lightroom. Most basic feature, just being able to print out of Lightroom, isn't currently in the newer Lightroom application, but it's in the Lightroom Classic. The second main reason to use Lightroom Classic over Lightroom is that it's great if you have a very large photo library. So when you're using Lightroom, your photos are going into a cloud, and that's a service that you have to pay for. You get a certain amount of cloud storage with your Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, but if you have a very, very large library of photos, you could run out of space and have to purchase more cloud space, which could cost money. External hard drives are relatively inexpensive these days, so if you have a ton of photos, it's probably less expensive to use Lightroom Classic and to store your photos on those external hard drives. If you are considering upgrading to the Creative Cloud Lightroom, then you might be using Lightroom 6 right now. So what you're using is a non-Creative Cloud version of Lightroom. It was called Lightroom 6 when you purchased it. If you want to upgrade to a Creative Cloud, then you're going to want to upgrade to Lightroom Classic for that same user experience. The app that's now called Lightroom is new and different than Lightroom Classic. So why not use Lightroom? Well, I've talked about some of those reasons already. It's missing some important features. Lightroom is still a young application. It's still being developed and it's still getting new features all the time, but some of the features that you might be looking for, you might not find in Lightroom. And then there's the cloud storage component. If you have a very, very large library of photos, you may not be able to put all your photos in the cloud with the basic Creative Cloud subscription. If you're using Lightroom, all your photos are in the cloud. It needs that artificial intelligence to search for specific images, and you won't be able to do that if you're offline. And you can only have one catalog or one library per user. So with Lightroom Classic, you could have multiple catalogs. I don't recommend that you do that, or you don't necessarily need to do that, but there are some instances where you might want to have more than one. So why not use Lightroom Classic? Well, the number one reason to not use Lightroom Classic is that it does have a pretty steep learning curve, especially for novice computer users. So I like to say, if you're the type of person that saves your important documents on your desktop so that you can find them again at a later time, then Lightroom Classic might not be the right application for you, because it really does require a solid understanding of how computers work, how to create folders, how to work with external hard drives, how to move and copy files from one folder to another, how to find your files. All of that's really important if you're going to be using Lightroom Classic. So I hope that cleared things up a little bit on what the basic differences are. And what I want to do now is I want to actually show you what these applications look like. And I'm going to start with the Creative Cloud application here. This is the Creative Cloud desktop app, and it's really your hub for everything Creative Cloud. So if you haven't ventured into Lightroom yet, or even the Creative Cloud, the first thing that you're going to want to do after you get your subscription is to download and install the Creative Cloud app. This is where you sign into your account, and this is where you install your applications. If I come up here to all apps, we can see the apps that I have installed, and if I scroll down here, we can find other apps that are available to me because I have a full subscription that I haven't installed on my computer. So with the Creative Cloud app, you can install the Lightroom app and you can open it as well. And you can keep updates. You can have it run updates automatically, or you can run updates here. If I come over here to the left under categories and I click on photography, then it just shows us photography apps. So if you have the photography plan, if you have the Creative Cloud photography plan, you're going to see these desktop apps here. Now we see Lightroom, and we see Lightroom Classic, and we see another Lightroom down here. So that gets kind of confusing sometimes. So what exactly is going on? Well, this is the Cloud Lightroom, the newer Lightroom, and this is the older Lightroom called Lightroom Classic. And down here, this Lightroom is actually a link to a web browser. So notice it says launch here. It doesn't say open. If you click on that, it's going to take you to your browser, and it's going to go to a Lightroom website. A lot of people don't realize this, but you can access your Lightroom photos using a browser. You don't even have to have an application. So if I have enough time this morning, then I plan on showing you what that looks like too. There's one other thing I wanted to point out here because it might help keep straight the different applications. is if you look really close at the app icons, some of them have rounded corners and some of them don't have rounded corners. So if we look at Lightroom that has it says the cloud-based photo service, that app icon has rounded corners. And if we come over here to Lightroom Classic, it has square corners. If we look at Bridge, it has square corners. And if we look at Photoshop, it now has rounded corners. It didn't used to have rounded corners. It had square corners until the most recent release, which is called 2020 Photoshop. So this is something that Adobe has done to distinguish the applications that have a cloud component versus those that don't. When you see the rounded corners on an app icon, then it's got some cloud component to it. And Lightroom with the rounded corners is your cloud Lightroom. And that means that your photos are in the cloud, not the application. None of these applications run in the cloud, but the content is in the cloud. So for Lightroom Classic with the square corners, your photos are on a local hard drive. They have to be on a local hard drive. So it doesn't manage your photos in the cloud. So what does that say about Photoshop? I know this confuses a lot of people when it first happened, when Photoshop first changed to these rounded corners. And Adobe did that because with the release of Photoshop on the iPad, they built a new cloud system called Cloud Docs, and that's how you save files back and forth between your iPad Photoshop and your desktop Photoshop. So now Photoshop also has a cloud service or a cloud component, and that's why it has rounded corners. So hopefully that clears some stuff up for you. So let's start by taking a look at the new Lightroom, the cloud Lightroom. So that's what I have open here, and I've opened, there isn't any photos in this. I'm starting from absolute scratch for you. I am fortunate enough to have two different Lightroom applications, or not Lightroom applications. I have two different Creative Cloud subscriptions. One that I use for my personal work and my professional work, and another one that I use for teaching and demonstrating. And that's the subscription that I'm using here. So there's not any photos in my Lightroom right now. So I can explain to you from the very beginning steps of how it works and how you get your photos into it. So I'm looking at the home view here, and there's a bunch of tutorials. Some of them you can just watch and follow along, and others you can actually download the photo and follow along with the tutorial. So it's a good way to learn how to edit. It doesn't really get into much about how to manage your photos though. We're going to switch to the next view, which I like to call the library view, but it's called My Photos. I call it the library view because this icon looks like library books or books on a bookshelf. Where in this view, we can now add photos. Now, before I add the photos, I actually want to jump out to my Finder and show you how I've organized my files for this demonstration today. I put some folders and some files on an external hard drive. I have this little Seagate drive that's red, so I call my drive the little red drive. And on this drive, I created a classic catalog, which we'll get to in a minute. And I have a folder, and these are this folder called Shape and Form. These are the photos that I'm going to demonstrate to import into Lightroom, the cloud version of Lightroom. I've got 8 JPEG images in here. The JPEGs are a little bit smaller than if I was using the full raw photos. So I'm just going to demonstrate with these 8 to import into Lightroom. This photo library that I called T. Jackson Photos, this is kind of like a mini example of what my personal photo library catalog looks like. I organize my photos by year, and the inside of each year folder, I have a folder by date, with an event name on it. So this is my personal way of organizing my photos, and this is just a small amount of what I have on multiple drives on my main computer. You can see that I have other drives here that are connected to my computer as well. The reason why I didn't put the shape and form photos into the T. Jackson photos for this demo is I'm going to use the shape and form photos to import into Lightroom, which is going to upload them to the cloud. And then I'm going to demonstrate how to import photos into Lightroom Classic using these photos. And then I'm going to show you how to connect Classic to Lightroom Cloud. And when I do that, you're going to see what happens. It can get kind of confusing which photos are where. So by keeping them separate here, hopefully we'll be able to keep track of that. Okay, let's just do it. I think it'll make more sense if I do it instead of trying to explain it. When you first import photos into Lightroom, they just go into like a big bucket. You don't have folders like you have on your computer. It's a cloud service that is just like one big holding place for all of your photos. So it might be challenging to find those photos at a later time unless you import them in an organized way. So if you're going to use Lightroom, the cloud version of Lightroom, I recommend that you create an album for whatever photos you're going to import. So I'm going to create an album with the same name as the folder of photos that I'm importing. Because if I was to just import that folder, it wouldn't automatically take that folder name and create an album. It doesn't work like that. You have to manually create the album first. So I created the album. I'm going to select the album, and then I'm going to click on Add Photos. And this is the folder on my little red drive. So I'll select all 8 of these. And then I'll click Review for Import. It's going to show that we have 8 photos here. I'll click in the upper right-hand corner to add the 8 photos. And what's happening now is these photos are actually getting pulled up into the cloud. We see in the upper right-hand corner the cloud with a blue circle. If I click on that, it says syncing 8 photos. If I click on my album here, we don't see those yet because they haven't synced. This might take a few minutes because I'm live streaming this at the same time I'm uploading photos. So I think what I'll do is I'll switch over and do the demonstration for Lightroom Classic, and then we'll come back and we'll take a look at this. Okay, how to take a drink of water. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. How to take a drink of water. Maybe make me slow down. Might be going too fast here. So I just switched over to Lightroom Classic. Before I go any further on this, let me pause here and make something really clear, hopefully really clear. I am demonstrating both the Lightroom application and the Lightroom Classic application on the same computer in hopes that I can clear up how they're the same or how they're different, but I don't recommend that you do this. And as I get into this a little bit further, it might become really kind of clear why you wouldn't want to use both Lightroom and Lightroom Classic on the same computer. You start losing track of where your photos are and where they came from if you're running them both side by side, unless you have a really solid file management skills and you're following what's going on. You could get lost pretty quick. So do as I say, not as I do here. So I created this demo catalog. There isn't any photos in it yet, and I want to import some of those photos from my little red drive. So I'm going to click on Import, and I'm going to, on the left-hand side here, find my little red drive and see all the year photos that I have, or the folders for the different years. And I'll select on this 2020. If I open this up, we'll see that there's 3 folders in here. In my real world workflow, I would import these one folder at a time. And that would allow me to give some specific keywords over here on the right when I do the import. Another thing that I would do is I would give it a metadata preset for my copyright information, and I even have some develop presets that I apply. But I'm not gonna cover that today. Maybe in a future Lightroom webinar I can do that. Right now I just want to get some photos into Lightroom Classic. So I'm gonna import all three of these photos at the same, all three of the folders at the same time by importing the entire year of 2020. And because at the top here where I have include subfolders checked, it will import all three folders. Now the other thing that I'm doing just to speed things up is I'm only building minimal previews. I typically would use standard, but this will go faster. Because what's happening behind the scenes is when you do an import to Lightroom Classic, you're not really putting your photos into Lightroom. I think the terminology is very misleading. That term import makes us think like ingest, like we're picking something up and putting it into something. And that's probably the #1 misconception about Lightroom Classic that confuses so many new users. All you're really doing when you import photos into Lightroom Classic is you're teaching Lightroom about the location of the photos. And Lightroom is building preview JPEGs so that you can see what they look like. At the top of the screen here where it says add, that tells us that we're just adding information about the photos. Lightroom Classic is not going to touch the photos. It's not going to move them. It's not going to put them in a cloud. It's not going to put them on a different drive. It's just going to learn about them. So I'll click the import. And we see really quickly here on the left-hand side in our folders panel, we see the drive show up, the little red drive, and the 2020 folder and the 3 folders that are inside of there. This is just a window to my Finder or Explorer if you're on a Windows machine. It's not inside of Lightroom, it's just pointing to that information. I'm going to go ahead and import at least one other folder so that I can show you a couple other tips here. Let's go to another year, see what we have. We'll pick a folder from New York. Maybe one with some buildings or something in it. Yeah. Okay, so we'll come down here and click import. And it's, again, it's just adding it. It's wanting to enable the address lookup because there was some iPhone photos in there that had GPS enabled. So I just disabled that for right now. That would be if you wanted to track them in the map module. All right, so if we look in the folders panel over here on the left-hand side, we see the New York folder, but we don't see the year folder that was sitting inside of. It's there, Lightroom knows about it, but because we imported this folder directly, it's not showing it to us. So this is the tip I wanted to show you. If you have a 2-button mouse, you can right-click right here, or if you're on a Mac with a 1-button mouse, you can use your control key and click, and you get this contextual menu. And down here, where it says Show Parent Folder, I'm going to select that, and now it shows the year that was in. So I could go through my entire library of photos on my drive, importing these one folder at a time, adding keywords as I go, and build out my catalog. But the most important thing to understand about this is these photos are not in the cloud. They haven't been copied anywhere. They're still where they lived originally when I imported them. And another tip for you to trust that that's where they are and to double check it is to do that right click again, or that control click directly on an image, and then you get this option here to show in Finder. And if you're on a Windows machine, that'll say reveal in Explorer. So I'll do that. That's going to jump me out to my Finder. and it went to that folder. If I hold my command key down and I click on that, we'll see the path. So on the little red drive in the T. Jackson photos in the 2020 folder is a folder for Sedona. That's the folder we're looking at. And there's the image right there that we were looking at in Lightroom Classic. So the photos are on the hard drive and Lightroom Classic knows about them. Okay, I'm going to switch back to Lightroom and see if my import finished. Let's see if we change our view here. Here we go. We have the 8 photos that I imported into Lightroom. So backing up for a second here, this is Adobe Lightroom. This is the cloud version of Lightroom. The application's running on my computer, but the photos that I'm looking at here aren't on my computer anymore. They're in the cloud. They're managed in the cloud. And you can check that in Lightroom. In the lower right-hand corner is this eye inside of a circle. I'm going to click on that to get information. And down here where it says sync status, it tells us where the files are. Now this is saying that on my local drive or my computer is the original, and in the cloud is the original. So what's happening here is the local location of the file is what's called a cache. So while you're working on or editing a photo with Lightroom, it will cache that image to your local drive, meaning that it's only there temporarily. As your computer needs space to work, it'll cycle through that cache and clear out the photos that you're not currently working on. The most important thing to know and to understand, though, is the photo itself, the original photo, is managed. The master is in the cloud. If you delete it from the cloud, it's going to delete it from everywhere. I hope that's clear. That's really, really important to understand, that the master is in the cloud, and that's the you cannot have a separate version of it on your computer that stays if you delete it from the cloud. Now, if we go back to the Finder where I originally imported those from, let's go back to the little red drive. These photos are still here, but they don't have any connection to what's inside of Lightroom Cloud. So if I make edits to the photos inside of Lightroom, nothing's going to happen to these images here. If I delete from Lightroom, nothing's going to happen to these images. They're completely disconnected from each other. So in reality, you can delete this folder after you import it from the cloud. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing that. I wouldn't just delete it. But what you might want to do is to put it on a backup drive someplace and just put it on the shelf so you have it, you know you still have it. But if you leave it on your hard drive, it gets kind of confusing because you might lose track of where Lightroom is managing the photo. And Lightroom is not managing the photo that's on your hard drive if you're using Lightroom. And Lightroom meaning the cloud version of Lightroom. Okay, so if we go through all of these photos down here, if I just switch from one to the next, we'll see that all of these are in the cloud. Let's see if we come back here. I don't know why that one said, they all say original, in the cloud, and local. All right, let's go back to Lightroom Classic now. This is where it's exciting, maybe a little bit scary, and certainly confusing. And this is what I'm going to show you now is how you can actually connect Lightroom Classic to the cloud. So Lightroom Classic photos are on your hard drive, but you can sync some of them selectively to the cloud, which is awesome. It gives you an incredible amount of power to take your images on the road, but actually manage them on your computer at home. In order to do this, we have to make a connection from Lightroom Classic to Lightroom. We have to connect that sync. We have to turn it on. And to turn it on, you do that up here under the nameplate. Right here where it says sync with Lightroom, start. I'm not actually going to click the start yet because I want to show you another really important preference to set before you do that. I just wanted to explain that first, after we change the preference, we're going to turn on the sync here by clicking start. So if I was to have clicked start without changing the preference, what would happen is the photos that are in the cloud in Lightroom will get pulled down to my computer, and by default they're going to get pulled down to the pictures folder, but I don't want them to go into my pictures folder. So I'm going to come up here to Lightroom Classic Preferences. And in the preferences, we have a bunch of tabs across the top. Right now I'm on the general. I'm going to go down here towards the end and click on Lightroom Sync. So right now I don't have the sync turned on. I'm going to turn on the sync, but before I turn on the sync, I want to specify the location for the synced images. And notice over here on the right, it's telling me the path. Users, Theresa, pictures. So by default, that is the location of the synced images. And I want to change that. Before I change that, let me make sure this is really clear what's going to happen here. The location for the Lightroom synced images is the location of where the photos are going to go that Lightroom Classic pulls down from the cloud. Because Lightroom Classic requires that photos live on a hard drive, they have to be on a local hard drive for Lightroom Classic to work with them. When you make the connection with Lightroom Classic to Lightroom or the cloud, anything that's up there in the cloud has to come down to your computer. Lightroom Classic is like a vacuum. It pulls everything out of the cloud down to your computer to this location. So I'm going to change this and go to my my hard drive, my little red hard drive, and I'm going to create a new folder here. And just so that it's really clear for me and for you, I'm going to say this is from Lightroom. So I know whatever ends up, you know how hard it is to talk and type at the same time? It's a lot harder than it looks. Okay, so I have a folder that's from Lightroom. It's empty right now. I just created it. I'm going to say choose. Notice that this path now says the location for Lightroom's synced images is this new folder. So we'll close out of this, and then I'm going to come up here back to my nameplate, click on it, and I can click on the start button. Now, you probably won't get this message, but let me explain what it is in case you do. Lightroom Classic can sync to the cloud, but only a single catalog can be synced at a time. You probably only have one catalog, and I recommend that if you're using Lightroom Classic, you only have one catalog. But because I teach and I do demos and presentations, I'm always creating new catalogs for my demos. And I've done this before with a different demo catalog that's already synced to Lightroom. So I'm getting this message and it's saying, hey, you only get one catalog. Do you want to use the previous one that you synced, or do you want to use this new catalog? And I want to use this new catalog, so I'm going to say yes, sync this catalog instead. Now it might take a second. What's going to happen when it makes the connection is the photos that are in Lightroom, those 8 shape and form photos, are going to get sucked down to my computer onto that external hard drive there. It's popping in now. You see that here in the folders panel? It says from Lightroom. It's counting up. There's now 8 of them, and there they are. They just showed up. Sorry, I had to take another drink of water there. We see up in the left-hand corner that it says syncing 8 photos. So it's downloading those photos to the hard drive. Here's another thing that I hear a lot of confusion and even fear over. A lot of you are afraid to turn this on for the first time because there's this misconception that turning this on is going to send everything that's in your Lightroom Classic catalog into the cloud. But it doesn't work that way. It's actually the other way around. But I like to talk about it, this sync process between Lightroom Classic and Lightroom as a bi-directional sync. It's two different directions. We just did the southbound traffic. The content that was in the cloud got pulled down to the hard drive. To do the sync the other direction, or the northbound traffic, we have to create a collection of specific images and then sync that collection. And I'll do that in a second. But first I want to show you that these photos actually downloaded to my hard drive. So if I do a right click on this folder from Lightroom and I come down here to reveal in Finder or show in Finder, it's going to jump me out to my Finder. No, it didn't jump me out. Let's just switch over there to the Finder. Okay, remember shape and form. That's the folder that I imported to the cloud. Now let's open up this new folder from Lightroom. It has the exact same images, not a smaller preview, the exact same one. If we look at the file sizes, 10.9, 10.9, these are the identical images. So Lightroom Classic is connecting to this set, not this set. In fact, this original set, shape and form, this folder, isn't connected to Lightroom anywhere. And this is why it gets so confusing. This is the reason why you don't want to be using Lightroom and Lightroom Classic side by side on the same computer. We're only dealing with 8 images here and a total of 200 in Lightroom Classic. Your catalog is likely to get into the tens of thousands of images, and in a quick hurry you're going to lose track of, are those the photos that are in Lightroom, or are those the photos in Lightroom, and which ones are in the cloud and which ones aren't in the cloud. So my recommendation is, if you want to use Lightroom and Lightroom Classic together, use Lightroom on a different computer, like a laptop, or use Lightroom on your iPad, which is what I do, or your phone, because Lightroom on your iPad, your Chromebook, or your phone, your iPhone or your Android phone, is exactly the same Lightroom application that's on your desktop computer. Okay, so let's talk about how to do the northbound sync. We want to take some photos that are part of the Classic collection or the Lightroom Classic catalog, and we want to put those into the cloud so that we can share them with our friends when we're out and about, or so that we can edit them. One of my favorite things to do is to edit on my iPad. I actually prefer the editing experience on my iPad. In most cases, I prefer it to Lightroom Classic. I like using the selective brush edit with my Apple Pencil. I love the way the tools are laid out in an edit panel instead of a develop panel. Lightroom Classic just feels a little outdated when it comes to editing. So what we're going to do is, in order to put some of these images into the cloud, we need to create a collection. So I'm going to come down here to my collections panel here and click the plus and click create collection, and I don't know, we'll just call it favorites. You could have travel photos or anything, maybe an event that you photographed. You can create a collection for that. So I'm just going to call this favorites, and notice down here under options that it has sync with Lightroom checked. By turning, you won't see this option if you haven't made the connection between Lightroom Classic and Lightroom. This option in the create collection dialog box only shows up after you've turned on that connection. So I'm going to go ahead and sync it with Lightroom. When I create the collection, we see that it showed up here in the collections panel, and then I'll just add some photos to this. And they don't all have to be from the same folder, but I'll put a couple from that folder, and maybe I'll put a couple from Sedona in here. So you know when you're creating a collection, if you are a Lightroom Classic user, you would understand that collections are virtual folders and they can contain images from any folder that's on your in your catalog. And they can even be folders that are on different hard drives, but as long as they're in the Lightroom Classic catalog, you can add them to a collection. So I've got 5 photos in this collection and they're already syncing. Come look up here in the upper left-hand corner where it says syncing 5 photos. Those are already syncing up to the cloud, or the northbound traffic as I like to describe it. If you made a collection and you didn't turn on the sync when you first created it, it's really easy to turn it on after the fact. If you look really close to the left of the name of the collection, there's that sync icon. We also see that same sync icon, might be easier to see in the upper corner of the slides here. Another way you can turn it on is do that right click or control click, and you'll see the contextual menu. You see the option here, sync with Lightroom. Notice it has a check by it, so it's synced. So it looks like there's one left to go, syncing one photo. I'm going to switch back over to Lightroom and go out to my library view here. And look at there, favorites. There's only 4. It's still got one more that's syncing up. So when you create a collection in Lightroom Classic and you sync it with Lightroom, it becomes an album inside of Lightroom. Now this album will show up in Lightroom on your phone, Lightroom on your iPad, wherever you're using Lightroom, you'll see that album. So inside of collection, or inside of Lightroom Classic, they're called collections, and inside of all of the Lightroom apps, they're called albums. Let's switch back to Classic here, and we'll see if I come up to collections and I open up this collection set, there's the album that I made originally in Lightroom. It became a collection inside of Lightroom Classic when I turned on the sync. Once that connection was made, the photos downloaded to the folders and the album became a collection inside of Lightroom Classic. And then for the other direction, the northbound sync, I created this collection, favorites, inside of Lightroom Classic. And when I synced it, it became an album up here in Lightroom. Now, I can do edits to these. Let's just take this photo here. I don't know how quickly this will sync up because of the bandwidth issues, but if I just edit this photo, let's just do an auto edit. Maybe take the highlights down a little bit. Maybe change the profile. I really like the Adobe Landscape profile. It's a little bit more saturated and punchy looking. Maybe add some clarity to it. Overall, this looks too blue, so I'll make it a little warmer. All right, I'm spending way too much time on that. The edits that I just made to that photo here in Lightroom are going to get synced back to Lightroom Classic. It might take a little bit of time, but they're going to eventually pop in here. So they haven't yet. I can see that's not edited yet. If I switch over to the Develop module, we see all of the sliders here right down the center. But when the sync finishes, all these sliders are going to move to match what I did in Lightroom. Now again, I know I'm sounding like a broken record here. I wouldn't be doing that on the same computer. I would be doing that on my mobile device instead. If I wanted to edit in Lightroom instead of Lightroom Classic, I would use my iPad. And then I wouldn't be using Lightroom at all on my computer. So let's see how that will work with a phone. I'm going to connect my phone and show you why I love Lightroom on my phone. I need a second here to get my phone to AirPlay over to my desktop here. And I use an application called Reflector, and I'm setting that up right now. Once I get this up, awesome. I need to move this over onto the screen so you can see it. So there's my phone. We're now looking at the Lightroom app on my phone. This is in live real time. Notice there are 13 photos. The same photos that I imported with the Lightroom app and the photos that I synced from Lightroom Classic. And if I back out here, we see the albums. The shape and form album that I originally created with the Lightroom app is here on my phone, because Lightroom on my phone is exactly the same as Lightroom on my desktop, the cloud version of Lightroom. We also see the album favorites that actually resides inside of, on my desktop, inside of Classic. Let's see if this edit will sink in here. This is the one that I edited on my computer using Lightroom. It doesn't look like the edit is synced up yet, probably because I'm streaming while I'm doing this live. But eventually, all the edits that I did over here in Lightroom will pop in. So all of these edits that we see here on the right will pop into my phone over here. So the reason why I love Lightroom on my phone is to take photos. I don't actually use the camera app that comes with my phone nearly as often as I use the camera that's built into the Lightroom app. And the reason why is when I take a picture with the camera here, we'll do that. I'll tap on the camera in the right-hand corner, and I have the Adobe Art Director here. I'll take a picture of it. This is sitting on my desk in real time. That photo that I just captured, first of all, it's raw. It's a raw DNG, so we have the full ability to edit it just like a picture that we might take on our big cameras in RAW. So that's the first reason I love shooting with Lightroom. But the next reason is it doesn't reside on my device. It doesn't fill up my device because Lightroom automatically sends everything up into the cloud. So this photo, if I select it and if I tap on the cloud up here, we can see cloud backup is the original. So the original is still on the local drive. It will eventually remove itself from the cache. The master file is in the cloud. And so what does that mean? If this master file is in the cloud, that when I switch back to Lightroom Classic, it's going to download to my hard drive. And that happened pretty fast. I think if we come up here, if we go back to my library, and I look at all synced photos, there it is. There's the photo that I captured on my phone just a moment ago. This guy's sitting on my desk here as I'm sitting here talking to you. I captured it on my phone with Lightroom. It went into the cloud. Because I had Lightroom Classic open and Lightroom Classic's connected to the cloud, it pulled that photo down to a hard drive. So if I do a right click on this and I say show in Finder, it's going to jump me out to the From Lightroom folder that I created, and I'll just hit my spacebar to get a preview of that. There's the image. The DNG original photo is on my external hard drive that I set up for my sync from Lightroom. This is so powerful. You no longer have to plug your phone in and go find some application to import your photos and move them over. They just automatically show up there. I think it's awesome. I get super excited by that. Okay, let's see if that edit ever synced up. Let's go back to Sedona here, or we'll go back to the, yeah, it's taking its time. It'll get there. I promise. It works for me all the time. I think I have, I do. I finished with just a few minutes left to go. So I promised that if I had time, I was going to show you Lightroom on the web. So I'm going to switch back to the Creative Cloud here, and down where it says Web Apps and Services, I'm going to click Launch. And that's going to open Safari. Let's pull Safari over here. Look closely at the top at the URL address. It says lightroom.adobe.com. Anytime you want to get access to your photos and you don't have Lightroom with you, maybe you're at a friend's house and they don't have Lightroom, but you want to show off your photos, you can just pull up their browser, go to lightroom.adobe.com, sign in with your Creative Cloud subscription, which is in the upper right hand corner over here. If we click on that, you'll see my account. And you'll see everything that you have that's part of your Lightroom ecosystem or your Lightroom cloud. And it looks almost exactly like the Lightroom desktop application. You see your albums, you see all your photos, you can even edit them. Let's go to the favorites here. If you select an image, now again, I'm using Safari here. This is a web browser. This is not the Lightroom application. I clicked on an image. In the upper left-hand corner is the Edit This Photo button. It's a little slower using the browser, but notice we get all of our edit functions over here, including the ability to do your auto edit. We can adjust the exposure. When I save and exit out of this, whatever edits I did, let's close back out of that. Any edits I do to that are going to sync up everywhere. They're going to show up in my Lightroom applications, on my phone and my iPad. They're going to show up in Lightroom Classic on my desktop. So extremely powerful. The other reason that I would recommend checking out lightroom.adobe.com is it really is the window to your cloud. If you ever have some sync issues where something is on your phone but it's not in Classic and you're trying to figure out where that sync broke down, log into lightroom.adobe.com. If you see the photo there, then you know it's in the cloud. So what you see here is what is actually synced to the cloud. So we have all of our all of the photos that I imported. If I switch back to Lightroom, now we're at Lightroom application, we see the same 14 photos. Awesome. There's a little bit of a delay between what I'm doing and the chat. I see a bunch of you guys are here. I appreciate you so much for being here and asking questions. I'm going to see if I can answer any questions that are here. I'm going to pull over the chat. You guys will be able to see the chat and run through these questions and see. Karen, you don't have to call Adobe. It is confusing. Thank you for being here. Yes, I would say myself that Lightroom is unnecessarily confusing, but maybe that's why I love talking about it so much. Banjo, Jimmy, what happens if you remove the original photo from the folder on your drive? Well, that's a great question. It depends. It depends on which Lightroom application you're using. If you're using Lightroom, the cloud version, it doesn't matter at all. You can remove it because the photo's now in the cloud. But if you're using Lightroom Classic, it's a big problem. In fact, I can demonstrate that. I meant to do that. I came back over here to Classic. If we go to the folders, we have the two folders, the 2018 and the 2020 that I imported. I'm going to switch to those folders on my hard drive. We'll close out of this. And I won't remove the folders, but I'll just rename one of them. I'll come down here and I'll just rename the 2020 by putting an X on the end of it. And then I'll switch back to Lightroom Classic and instantly all of these folders got question marks on it. And that's probably happened to you if you're using Lightroom Classic. It's happened to me. It happens to all of us. We forget what we've imported, and then we start cleaning house, renaming things, changing the location, deciding the drive's full, moving it to a different drive. And when you do that behind Lightroom's back, Lightroom Classic, that's the way I like to describe it, I just made that change behind Lightroom Classic's back, and now Lightroom Classic's like, hey, where did it go? I can't find it. Well, if you know where you moved it or how you renamed it, you can fix it right here inside of Lightroom by doing a right click on it and say find missing folder and navigate to that missing folder. The missing folder is inside of T. Jackson Photos, and it actually isn't missing, it just got renamed. So I'll select the renamed one, say choose, and it changed the name here inside of Lightroom Classic as well, and there's no more question marks. All the images came back. We didn't lose any edits or anything. All the information is there. Okay, so where did my chat go? See, I closed out of, I think, wait a minute, trying to find my chat so I can come back to it. Maybe it went onto a different, there it is, right here. Okay, so what other questions that we have? Thank you, Celeste, for answering that question already. Now I just demonstrated it as well. I'm reading through these. So Lightroom Classic is behind in editing capabilities in comparison to Lightroom CC. No, it's not. And I appreciate you asking that question because I probably misstated that. Lightroom Classic is not behind. Everything that you can do in Lightroom Classic, you can do in Lightroom. I think there might, maybe it's possible. It depends on Lightroom, which device you're using Lightroom on. There are a few of the really advanced features that aren't quite in the mobile yet, but 99.99% of everything that you're going to do in editing in any one of the Lightroom apps, you can do in the others. The difference is the way that they're laid out. So the classic interface is older, and some of the terminology is older. For example, we're looking at Lightroom Classic in the background here, and we see a library module, and then we see a develop module. I'm looking at the upper right-hand corner here. So the develop module is where you edit your photo. Well, those of us that are old enough to have spent time in an actual darkroom remember the term develop from film. So it's old. Today, when we work on editing our photos, we call it editing. So in the Lightroom application, which is newer, you're not going to find anything that says develop. You're only going to find edit. And inside of edit, the tools are much, they're better laid out. They're organized in a way that makes sense. Whereas in Lightroom Classic, you have a basic panel. It's like, you know, what's a basic panel for? In Lightroom, you have a light panel, you have a color panel, you have an effects panel. So I think it's just better organized. What other questions we have? Thank you, Celeste, for answering that question too. Shout out to my girlfriend Celeste. I really, really appreciate your support. She really encouraged me to do this, and she's here helping answer questions in the chat. So I appreciate that so much. I think that captures all the questions. Will this be open to replay? Yes, this is being recorded to YouTube live as I do this. It's getting recorded into YouTube, so it will be on my channel after this is done. So Andrew wants to know about the workflow while traveling. Specifically, how can I find everything in Classic when I get back home? The first thing to do, Andrew, before you turn on the sync inside of Classic is to make sure that you create a folder for those images someplace other than your pictures folder. Maybe on an external hard drive. If you're traveling with a whole lot of, and you're taking a whole lot of photos, you're probably going to want those to download to an external hard drive, just like I demonstrated here. And then, as soon as you turn on that sync, those photos are going to start downloading from the cloud, from your iPad, and they're going to go to that external hard drive. And then there's two ways that you can find those photos. In Classic, you can find those photos in the folders panel by finding the folder that you set up for the download, or you can find them in the collections. If you created albums while you were traveling, they will show up in here as collections. If you want to reorganize your collections or the location of your photos after they download, do it inside of Lightroom Classic. It'll actually move the photos. So if I was to say this folder here actually belonged in 2018, I can take it up here and drag it, and it's telling me it's going to move the files on the disk. So it actually took that whole folder on my hard drive and it moved it up to the 2018 folder. And Lightroom didn't lose track of it. See the 2020 folder down here. Because I used Lightroom to move it instead of doing it through the Finder, Lightroom didn't lose track of it. So after all your photos get downloaded, Andrew, you can go back in, or you can go into Lightroom Classic and reorganize them in a way that might be better suited for the way that you want to have them in a permanent state. Doug, or Andrew's asking about plugins. No, as far as I know, the plugins DxO and On1 do not work with your Lightroom cloud. You would need to connect Classic to the cloud to download those images, and then you can use your plugins there. And Doug wants to know the benefit of editing in Lightroom over ACR. It's just prettier, Doug. It's just, okay, that's the first reason. Lightroom is better laid out. Adobe Camera Raw is an old interface. It's clunky. Things are hard to find. They're not in a very intuitive flow, where Lightroom's been redesigned to be more streamlined. All the same features are there though. So that's the first reason. The second reason is Lightroom is a file manager as well as an editor. ACR is just an editor. It doesn't have, you could create collections, but it doesn't have all of the abilities that Lightroom does to manage your catalog of photos. Kim said, talk about unlinking in Classic, then deleting from the cloud. Okay, let's go to Lightroom Classic. If I come up here, this is the easiest way to do it, honestly. If I come up to the catalog in the library panel, this is like a smart collection of all the photos that are currently in the cloud. If this photo that I took from my phone, if I don't want it to be in the cloud anymore, I'll delete it from this collection. Just hitting my delete key. It removed it from that collection, so it's no longer part of the cloud, but it's still on my hard drive. I still have that photo. So you can delete images from the cloud using a Lightroom app, as well as using this inside a Lightroom Classic. Either way, it does the same thing. I hope that answered that question, Kim, in a way that was clear. Hannah's here. Hannah, yes, Celeste is great. You guys are both great. My Aunt Linda's here. Happy Easter to you too, Linda. ACR is the engine, not the asset manager. That is a very succinct way to answer that question, Celeste. Thank you so much for that. So I wanted to finish up. I probably went a little bit over time now. I want to just finish up with, let me go back to about me. I'll come back on camera here. I wanted to finish up by just giving you some more information that you can follow up with. I have a few Lightroom courses on LinkedIn Learning, and the first course, Learning the Lightroom Ecosystem, it's really all of this content broken down into smaller chunks and in much more depth. And I'm going to put a link to that course in the chat as soon as I get as soon as the webinar is done. The next Lightroom course that I have on LinkedIn Learning is called Get Professional Results, and that's all about editing. And I go into how to use all of the tools in Lightroom to edit with a real focus on why. not just how, not just what a tool does, but why you would want to use it, how to improve your composition by using those different tools. And then finally, I have a new Lightroom course coming out soon. I recorded it back in February, or actually January, so it should be coming out real soon. And that one's called Social Sharing, and that's all about how you can create galleries of images, you can create public links and share them with your friends and family, and that works with Lightroom Classic and Lightroom on the web, and that course goes into all of the details of how to do that. So look for that real soon. In June, I'm going to be speaking at the Creative Pro Week conference. Unfortunately, we're not going to Austin for it because of the coronavirus. They've decided to make it an online event, but the good news is that everybody can attend now because you can attend the conference from home. And I'll be giving 2 sessions at that conference, one about mobile apps, just mobile apps in general. I love mobile workflows. I'm going to do a whole session on that. And the second session is going to be RGB to CMYK workflows. And finally, you can find me on Twitter or Instagram at TJ's Orchard. And also, while you're here, make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel. I try and put a couple videos on it every month. And you can send me questions about topics that you might like to see me record for future YouTube tutorials. So again, thank you so much for being here. I hope you learned something and are inspired to give Lightroom a try if you haven't yet. All right, goodbye.